My name is Lisa Hoffart. I'm a registered psychologist and mental performance consultant. I work with the Sport Medicine and Science Council of Saskatchewan. Like the past couple of weeks, we've got special guest Anna, who is joining us to talk about her experiences. Anna, if you want to introduce yourself, just take a minute.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Young, and I'm so excited to be talking about thinking patterns today with Lisa. As some of you may know, I'm a former professional golfer who played on the Symetra Tour, which is now formerly the Symetra Tour, which is now called the Epson Tour. I was lucky enough to go to the University of Florida, where I earned a psychology degree or a bachelor's of science in psychology. And now I'm loving coaching. So it's so fun to be able to bring my personal experience of competing on the professional tours to you guys, which is like just so fun. Plus, this stuff is, to make it blunt, it is the most interesting part of golf, in my opinion. But, you know, that's just me. So I'll let Lisa get started and I'll hop in when I'm ready.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna.
You're welcome.
So for our session tonight, we want to continue building on the last 2 weeks. Our first session was on self-awareness. Our second session was on goal setting. Again, if you were there for those sessions, that's great. Again, I think this is another piece in the puzzle. If you weren't, this still works as a standalone session. And just really thinking about how this applies to you, starting to build into those different pieces in terms of what's going to work for you, what doesn't work for you, and seeing how you can learn and take maybe a few pointers away. In terms of our objectives for the evening, really wanting to start off just by understanding thinking patterns. So understanding some of the ways that we just go about our day thinking about different things and don't even actually notice the patterns or the habits that we've just naturally developed over time. If we can start to have a bit more understanding of that, we can really then get better information about how that influences us. Ultimately, we want our thinking patterns to be helpful. We want them to work for us. Sometimes we get into ways of thinking that are less than ideal. And again, the more we can start to understand that, the more we can be able to make effective change. And then we're going to spend the second half of the presentation essentially looking at different ways that we can start reframing our thinking patterns. And the first part of that, we're going to look at cognitive reframing strategies. So really targeting the way that our mind is thinking, the different thoughts that we're having. But then because we know our brain and our body are so connected, we're also going to look at behavioral strategies and how we can use our body to then influence our mind to start having a shift in our perspective. So as I say throughout, please feel free to unmute yourself. You can put up your hand, you can put something in the chat. Happy to have you interact. We've got a smaller group tonight, but I think that does leave opportunity for questions and interaction if you want it, but totally up to you in terms of how it's going to be best for you to take things out of this. So I think this is a helpful way just to start off what I touched on in terms of our mind and our body being connected. And so we know that our brain helps to drive our muscles and helps to drive a lot of our different behaviors and actions. But really wanted to just detail it out through a pretty simple graphic, recognizing that these are three pretty main components that make up our day-to-day. So we've got our thoughts. Those are obviously the cognitive pieces, the things that are going through our mind. We have anywhere from 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And so again, recognizing that's a big number, and we want to make as many of them work for us. We know that those thoughts have an influence on how we're feeling, so on our mood and on our emotion. We can look at different strategies to emotionally regulate, to start to just calm our bodies down and try to navigate those feelings. The emotional component is something where we can't necessarily just push an emotion away and say, I'm not dealing with this. It tends to linger there in the background. So with that, the feelings then feed into our behaviors. And this is where we do have a lot of power, or we can consciously decide what behaviors are going to serve me, what actions are going to be helpful, what are the ways that I want to be acting. Then those behaviors have an influence on our thoughts, and the cycle goes through again. So recognizing that emotions are part of our day-to-day, that we don't have a ton of control over that, we can regulate it, but can't necessarily just get rid of those emotions as quickly as we'd like to. We want to spend time targeting the top half of this, or the top two pieces, in terms of our behaviors and our thoughts. Like I said, we're going to spend most of the time talking about thoughts and thinking patterns, but really being able to spend some time thinking about what kinds of thoughts you want to have before a competition, during a competition, in daily life. And then obviously during your training sessions too, what kinds of thoughts are going to be most helpful for you? What kinds of thoughts come up that are least helpful? And then we can start looking at how those are maybe paired with different behaviors, different actions that you're taking. So again, just different pieces that you can be thinking of as we're going through the presentation tonight. So as we talked about 2 weeks, self-awareness is such a critical component to so many different pieces of what we do. Especially when it comes to our thinking patterns, we need to have awareness of where our thoughts are, what kinds of thoughts we typically have, whether they tend to be, traditionally you would say maybe positive or negative. I really try to use the words helpful or unhelpful, because we want to know, is this helpful? Is this thought going to be helpful in terms of what I want to accomplish, in terms of what I'm doing? Or is this thought less helpful? Those helpful thoughts aren't always going to be extremely positive, rah, encouraging. Sometimes it's going to be more neutral, more realistic, more grounded. It can still be really helpful. So we want to just be able to frame using those words. I think that can sometimes give us a different perspective in terms of what's going to work for us. Also recognizing, obviously, that we can't counter thoughts, we can't manage thoughts, we can't deal with thoughts if we don't actually realize that we're thinking them. And so some thoughts are going to go through our mind. We're not going to pay a ton of attention to them. They're just kind of passing. Some thoughts seem like they come through and stay. And so again, we'll talk about different ways to deal with those different thought forms. But ultimately, it's our perception that makes such a big difference. If we can be more conscious of our daily thoughts, then we can start looking at, is this something that I'm able to use in a helpful way? Or is this something that's maybe ingrained and I need to start restructuring? So when we talk about thinking patterns, and we talk about starting to build our awareness, we all have what are called cognitive distortions. And so these are basically ways that our brain has started to think. And it's in a way that's supposed to be helpful. It's supposed to try to shortcut. It's supposed to try to help us process information quickly. They're developed through repetition, through the ways that we tend to interact with the world, sometimes through our personality or through what's reinforced with us. But they're not always actually helpful. And so if we can start recognizing which of these cognitive distortions we notice for ourselves, then again, it's just that part of being aware of them, and you can start shifting them into something that is going to be more helpful. So I'll walk through these one by one. When we look at personalizing, essentially, this is a thought pattern where we start to hold ourselves accountable for things that we don't have a ton of control over, things that we have little or no influence over. And so feeling things always come back to us. So, oh, I'm having a bad game because this happened, because I'm not doing all my things right, because I'm not doing all my patterns, or because I didn't do this earlier, or they are acting in this way because of something that I did. And so you're starting to make things all about you, even if there isn't really a ton of connection. So bringing it back to ourselves, kind of placing some of that blame or responsibility, that can be something that we start to do. Magnification or minimization. This starts to happen when the impact of an event or our role in it is really exaggerated. So we start to really make it a big deal. We start to magnify it. We start to kind of awfulize it or really build it up. I feel like if I miss that last shot, the whole game's going to be horrible. Or we minimize it, and we're starting to just kind of not take enough responsibility, thinking, you know what, that didn't matter. I don't worry about it. I don't really care. And so you start to feel like you're not as invested in something, even though you do actually care about it. You're trying to think in a way that maybe prevents you from feeling like you're dealing with those emotions or getting as caught up in it as you maybe could be, to take some positive action and change it. This next one, I find that a lot of athletes that I talk with do, can be called polarizing thinking, all or nothing thinking. Sometimes we'll talk about it in terms of black and white thinking. This is where essentially it's an either or. Things are either all horrible or all great. You're either perfect or things are useless. Things are going great, you're having a fantastic game, or everything's horrible. And so again, recognizing that when we start falling into these thinking patterns, we don't necessarily recognize those grays or those in-betweens. And so again, starting to recognize that if we can recognize some of the middle ground, that there can be a mix of good and bad in that neutral zone, that can start to make a shift. In terms of discounting the positive, again, this is something that comes up a lot with athletes that I work with. As we talked about with goal setting, we tend to think about what we want to do to get better, how athletes are going to make those improvements. But that often lends itself to not looking at strengths, not looking at things that are going well, and focusing only on the things that are really poor, those weaknesses, those things that you're not doing well. And so again, you're maybe focusing on that one shot you missed, but you're not thinking about the 10 before that were great. And so you just kind of narrow in on that one negative aspect and you kind of overlook the rest of them. When we start to label, this is where the power of our words can have a big impact. So this is where we use words that carry a lot of weight. And again, when we recognize that the words we use have a lot of weight, it can start to make a shift too. So things like should, I should have made that shot, or I have to make this shot. So should, have to, always, never, I never play well on this course, those kinds of things. So again, those words start to have a big impact in terms of how we're thinking about that overall statement, which can then obviously impact how we're moving forward from it. In terms of blame thinking, this is where we blame ourselves or other people for what's happened. So we think that something's either all our fault. So again, similar to that personalizing, we're bringing it back to ourselves. Sometimes we're wanting to offload that responsibility and we're pointing fingers. It's everyone else's fault and not our own. And so with this, we want to start looking at how we can understand like how events occur, recognizing that it's not usually one event or one situation that causes something to happen. There can be a number of different factors. And then last one, mind reading. When we engage in mind reading, we sometimes assume we know what other people are thinking, what they need or what they want. So say someone walks by you, you say hi, and they don't say anything. And you're thinking, oh, they must be mad at me. What did I say? What did I do wrong? And you're starting to overthink. And maybe they didn't hear you. Maybe they're on the phone. Maybe they're just totally off in their own land and kind of just not paying attention to what's going on around them. So again, we sometimes jump to conclusion about what other people are thinking, and then that can have an impact in terms of how we feel like we're moving forward. So again, those cognitive distortions exist for a reason. It's based on habits that we grow into. It's ways of trying to shortcut, try to have quicker thinking, but we recognize that they don't always serve us. And so having that awareness about maybe which ones, whether it's one or a couple that you kind of recognize in yourself, or maybe you're recognizing in others, again, it's that first step in terms of building awareness. Another way that we can start building awareness about our thoughts is recognizing how we tend to direct our thoughts. And so we can direct them in these 4 different ways: towards ourselves, towards others, towards the future, or towards the world in general, and towards the situation. And so a few different things before we dive into these 4 different categories. Number one, our thoughts tend to occur fairly automatically, especially initially, and especially some of those negative or less helpful thoughts. They almost feel like they just pop into our minds. So that can feel somewhat involuntary. What we want to do is we want to become conscious of those thoughts more quickly and start to modify it with some of the strategies we'll talk about later in the session. The reason we want to be able to be aware of those negative thoughts or those less helpful thoughts more quickly is because negative thoughts do tend to cascade one after another. So if you have an initial negative thought, you might have another one that almost feels like it's bigger or stronger, and then they tend to lead to others. And so instead of just thinking, okay, that wasn't a great shot, then all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, the rest of the game's gone. I'm never going to be able to get myself out of this. And you've gotten really negative really quickly. So again, if we can recognize that first thought that's unhelpful, then you can be able to intervene, use some of your strategies, and get yourself back on track instead of going down that downward spiral. So in terms of negative thoughts or unhelpful thoughts about ourselves, this is pretty straightforward. Beating yourself up, being negative about yourself, things that you're doubting yourself with, or feeling like you weren't good enough. Those can be things, negative thoughts that are directed towards yourself. I can't believe I did that. I should have known better. What's wrong with me? I'm never going to be able to do that. Those kinds of thoughts. Negative thoughts about others, where you start to really get down on what other people are doing. I can't believe they did that. I can't believe they said that. what are they doing? And so you're there's a judgment or a negativity that's being placed, but often it's because it's affecting something that we're doing or a situation that we're in. Negative thoughts about the future, feeling like things aren't going to get better. So, okay, well, that hole was horrible. The rest of the round is going to be just a waste. And so you're starting to project into what could happen or what might happen without actually knowing. And then negative thoughts about the world, just think that like things in general. So it's not just that what's happening right now, but that everything's going to be really horrible. It never gets any better. Here we go again. I always have bad luck. So those kinds of things. And again, maybe you're recognizing some of your own thinking patterns in these 4 different elements. Maybe you recognize that you tend to direct it in 1 or 2 different areas. Just wanted to give you these again as a way to start enhancing that reflection. So what we're going to do right now is I'm just going to pause. I'm going to give you just a minute or 2 to write down some of the negative thoughts or unhelpful thoughts that you have. And so we can try to keep this golf specific if you want. If it's easier to come up with things from daily life, that's totally fine too. The process of reframing thoughts is going to be the same regardless of whether it's sport or day-to-day. So I'll leave it there. You can also think back to your last training session, the last round you had, depending on some of those recent examples, they can sometimes be helpful. Again, I'll just give you a couple minutes with this. Okay, so hopefully you had a minute to write some thoughts down. Again, this isn't always the most fun activity to start thinking about what kinds of negative thoughts come in. I know sometimes it can take a little bit of time to get the brainstorm going. So if you feel like you have other thoughts that are coming in later, just add them to the list. We are going to work with this list a little bit. So just having those as kind of a starting point is great. And one of the reasons I like talking about thinking patterns so much is, like I said, when I was asking you to write this list down, it could be sport specific or it could just be day to day. The nice thing with this skill is obviously we're applying it to golf and to performance and how you can use your thinking patterns to be a better athlete and have those better performances. But we can be practicing this in so many different aspects of our day to day. We can be practicing it if you're driving and there's bad traffic, or if someone forgot to stop and pick something up at the store, or if you're just having a bad day or the weather's not great. There's always unhelpful thoughts or negative thoughts that are coming in. And so being able to have this strategy of recognizing those negative thoughts, but also pausing to reframe them is going to make a big difference, obviously in your performance, but also day to day. We've got something in the chat. This is great. Some of those negative thoughts that are coming in. Yeah, not being able to let go of some of those poor shots or putts, losing confidence if that kind of shot comes in again. Absolutely. Those can be some really common aspects where you start to doubt yourself and you just feel like, I can't do this and why can't I do it? And you start building it up. Feeling like maybe you can't concentrate or can't focus, that things just are really feeling harder than it should be. Again, I think those are really great examples. Thanks to both of you for sharing those. So that I wanted to spend not a ton of time, but a bit of time laying the foundation in terms of some of the different thinking patterns that we can have. But I want to spend the bulk of the presentation going over strategies because I think that's what we tend to get the most out of, is having a chance to listen to these, to think about how they might apply to ourselves and go through that process. So if there are questions, again, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. But if there aren't any questions, I'm going to jump into our first part, which is the cognitive strategies aspect of dealing with our negative thoughts or unhelpful thoughts. So there are a number of different cognitive strategies. These come from a few different theoretical backgrounds, and I'm not going to go into the theory of them. I don't think it's important in terms of your purposes. If you want to ask questions about the theory, I'm happy to chat it through. But really giving you 3 different cognitive strategies to help you be able to work through some of these thoughts that are coming in. So the first one, reframing. Again, having that awareness. We know that awareness is really important, but being able to start looking at what are those less helpful thoughts and replacing it with something that's going to feel more productive, more effective, more helpful. The second one here is acknowledging. So recognizing that this thought can be here, but we don't have to pay attention to it. It doesn't have to control us. We can choose what we're paying our attention to. So there's a focus aspect there. And then immersive. So being able to recognize that our thoughts can be rolling, we can have different thoughts that are coming in, but again, in terms of being able to just connect with what we're doing, directing our thoughts to the present as a way to enhance the experience, but also enhance the thoughts that we're having. So we're going to spend time on each of these three different ones. Wanted to overview them on this slide, but we'll dive into them in a bit more detail over the next few slides. So in terms of reframing, again, this is where we start to look at what is the thought that I'm having. Is this unhelpful? And if it is, we want to look at how could I try to replace that with something that is maybe more effective? How can I try to, look at what's going to be an effective replacement? And so I've got a few examples up on the screen. These are maybe ones that you've had in the past. Maybe they're ones that seem familiar. But just some examples just to start chatting it through. So maybe this thought of this is too hard and you're starting to get down on yourself. You're starting to doubt yourself. The emotions can start coming in where maybe you're starting to feel frustrated or angry or a bit defeated. And so you can obviously get sucked into that. Those thoughts can start building on it. The emotions can build. And then like we talked about earlier, it can feed into the behavior. But we can also look at how can I reframe this? How can I take a step back and put this into perspective? And so if you're starting to think this is too hard, maybe your reasonable response could be, okay, I'm just going to take it one thing at a time. It seems hard because it's this huge task. I'm just going to look at what's that next step? What's that next thing I need to do? And so again, that could be one example. And obviously you get to brainstorm what would be the best response for yourself. Again, we talked earlier about things being positive versus helpful. If we look at this example of just take it one thing at a time, it's not overly positive. It's not like, this isn't hard, I can do it, no problem. Like you're not kind of sugarcoating it or making it seem like overly positive or unrealistic. It's just what is going to be helpful right now. Yeah, take it one thing at a time. That might actually be really helpful. So just wanted to highlight that again. You might have this thought of that person looks way better than me. Maybe it's thinking about last time you played with them and maybe they had a really great game and you didn't. And maybe you feel like you're focusing more on them than yourself. And so a reasonable response, a way to reframe it could be, as an example, you know what, focus on my own performance. Maybe I'm bringing my attention back to my body, back to my swing, but focusing on myself could be a helpful way to start managing that thought. There might be thoughts, I suck, I can't do this. Again, starting to get really down on yourself. And again, just another example, I've worked hard, I've improved a lot. I can continue to work hard and I'll trust my body. And so again, you're kind of reminding yourself about the time and the effort that you've put in, maybe actually thinking about some of those ways that you've gotten better and just being able to trust that you're able to go out and do that again in that day. And so what I want you to do right now is I want you to take a minute to practice this for yourself. So going back to that list that you wrote down a couple slides ago, some of those negative thoughts, pick one or two, what that negative thought and how you might actually challenge it, reframe it, respond in a more reasonable way. So again, I'll give you a minute or so with this just to get practice at what this might look like for you brainstorming right now. If you're really stuck with it, feel free to put it in the chat. We can brainstorm together. You can unmute yourself. We can brainstorm together. This is just about starting to come up with other options. Okay, so as you're thinking about how you might reframe some of those thoughts, I just want to highlight that when we're in that moment and we're having those negative thoughts and you're on the course and you're trying to perform, and sometimes those emotions start getting built up too, and then it's influencing your behaviors. And again, you're getting into that cycle. We are more emotional and that can change how we're thinking too. And so by actually going through this process now, when it's maybe a relaxed evening or you're not feeling too much pressure or too much stress, it helps you to be able to think through things with more groundedness, with kind of more reasonable responses, and you're starting to plan. And so again, it's just helping you to feel more prepared in that moment when you do have that negative thought and you're feeling emotional. It's easier to recall something like the statements that you've just laid out than it is to try to come up with something totally new. So again, that's why we want to have this practice to actually write out those unhelpful thoughts and start brainstorming, because it's just about being able to then put it into place in that event that those negative thoughts are coming in. Yeah, perfect. So I think there's a couple of great things in the chat. So yeah, instead of focusing on the one you just missed or the shot that didn't go well, yeah, thinking about the shots that you did make or the putts that you did make. Perfect way to reframe. And again, it starts to look at that cognitive bias where we kind of focus down on that one thing and you discount the positives. So that would be a great way to start challenging that cognitive bias. Yeah, worrying about what people think is a huge hurdle. Absolutely. And so thinking, again, that's kind of the mind reading. We don't know what they're going to think. We don't necessarily know how that's going to be perceived. And so bring it back to ourselves, reminding ourselves that we can't actually mind read. And so what can I do right now to maybe feel like I have my next good shot or take that step forward? I'm going to give you a couple different strategies to start reframing. You just had a chance to do it on your own, but maybe you got stuck or maybe you just want some other ideas. I think with what we just chatted about through what was being shared in the chat is great. Yeah, using milder wording. And I talked about this a little bit earlier in terms of those words like always, should, never, have to, those kinds of things. Maybe you're saying, I hate this hole or I hate this course. There's something like that. I have to make this shot. You might use a milder wording and think, okay, this course isn't my favorite or this hole isn't my favorite. And again, you're kind of taking it down a level and that can change that perception too. Using neutral or positive replacements. This is where we're starting to actually look at how can I try to just soften this a little bit. Again, if it feels like it's really caught up into something that's horrible, thinking about some of those other things that have gone well. We talked about thinking about those shots that you did make. If you're thinking about only the things that you're not doing well or kind of your individual weaknesses, trying to shift onto what is going well. What are some of the strengths that I bring? Again, we talked a little bit about that over the last couple of weeks. Recognizing highs and lows, that every experience can have kind of a couple different things. So we want to recognize, yeah, that those lows are happening, but also what are some of the positives? What are some of the lessons? What are some of the highlights? And sometimes being able to reframe it as a lesson, that can be another way to think about it. This last one's a bit different. I think it's kind of fun. Changing our self-limiting statements into questions. And so this is kind of a game that you can play where maybe you have this thought like, I can't do this. And what you actually do is you change it into a statement in terms, or sorry, you change it from a statement into a question in terms of how you're saying it. So instead of saying it, I can't do this, you're saying, I can't do this. And you kind of question it. And because you're turning it into a question, your brain is taking it from being a fact as a statement into something that it's now all of a sudden starting to think, you know what, this maybe isn't true. And it's starting to look for other options. Our brain wants to try to gather information to solve that question. And so by starting to question it just in terms of how you're saying it and the intonation, your brain's starting to think about it a bit different. So it's kind of a fun way to switch things up. If you haven't done something like that, again, it can be something to test out. Where you're just kind of flipping that statement in terms of how you're saying it. We'll move into our next strategy, so the acknowledging. And again, recognizing that acknowledging is all about that thoughts can come and go. Again, we have 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. That's a lot. They don't have to control us. And so again, recognizing that we get to choose what we're paying attention to. And so with this, I think a couple of foundational pieces here is number one, that it's just a thought. And so sometimes it feels like our thoughts are really big and strong and powerful, but recognizing that thoughts are thoughts and that thoughts aren't always true. Thoughts aren't facts. And so sometimes even those can be pretty big shifts where you recognize that's just a thought. I don't need to feed into it. You don't have to let my thoughts control me. Sometimes it feels like they are, but you can give yourself that permission. You can give yourself that reminder. And being able to start thinking about thoughts in different ways. Sometimes it can be nice to have a visual aspect with it. So kind of thinking of a thought like a cloud in the sky. Some of those thoughts are going to go by pretty quickly. Some of them are going to feel like they're hanging around longer, but recognizing that we can still be acting, still be taking steps, still be directing our attention, even though this thought maybe feels like it's hanging around there. If we keep doing what we want to do, this thought can be there without necessarily needing to control us. So the cloud can be one example. Sometimes it's like a car driving down a street. You can hear it coming. It gets really loud as it goes by your house or by your window. And then you can hear it going until it just disappears. Thoughts are going to be similar, where you can maybe feel like they're hanging around for a while, but that it will pass. Another one, just to give you another example, like a thought could be like a leaf on a stream or something like that, where it's kind of floating downriver. Some days the stream is going really quickly, some days it's going really slow, but recognizing that it will kind of move forward. So a couple different reminders there. It's just a thought. It doesn't have to control me. It's not fact all the time. And then kind of waiting for that thought to pass without getting too caught up in it. Even sometimes saying an example of my brain is telling me that I can't do this. So instead of just saying, I can't do this, you're acknowledging that the thought's there. You're saying my brain is telling me this, but it also creates a bit of separation and a bit of distance. From there, you're able to redirect your thoughts towards something that's more meaningful for you, something that is going to be more helpful. So again, I want to pause for a minute and just give you a chance to write down how you might start to acknowledge thoughts without feeling like you're diving into them. So maybe there was a reminder that you liked. Maybe there was a strategy based on what I said that you want to test out. Maybe it's just even that reminder of, you know what, it's just a thought, or thoughts aren't facts. Whatever it is, I just want you to take a minute to jot down something that you might use to acknowledge a thought without really letting it grow. Okay, so moving into our third cognitive strategy, where we start to use an immersive technique. And again, this is when we start to engage with what we're doing. So again, it's starting to shift our attention, shifting our focus, shifting our thoughts onto the present moment as a way to really be able to enhance our experience, feeling like we're more connected, but also directing our thoughts, directing our feelings, directing our behavior into the present moment, where it does feel like we've got a lot more control or a lot more influence. And so with this, recognizing that sometimes we get so caught up in our head, so caught up in what our thoughts are telling us, that we aren't always paying attention to what's going on in our body, what's going on around us. And so with this, it's just starting to essentially notice what's going on around you. And so there is a mindful aspect to this. But if we can start to redirect our thoughts to what we're experiencing, what's going on around us, again, we start to recognize that we do have some power to start shifting our thoughts. And so you can do it right now, just in terms of looking around the space that you're in, and you can just kind of land your glance on a few different things and you start noticing it. Okay, my red water bottle, you can pick it up if you want. Okay, it's heavy, it's cold. The paper's on my desk. Okay, they're white. You shift over to the chair in the corner. And so you're kind of just noticing different things. You can pay attention to your body. Okay, you know what, I'm a fairly comfortable temperature right now. I had supper earlier, so I'm feeling like I had a good meal. Like, you can just shift in terms of what you're paying attention to. But the nice thing with this is that because you're consciously shifting from your water bottle to your papers, to your desk, to your chair, you get to recognize that you have control over your focus and over your attention and over shifting your thoughts and what you're actually feeding into. And so this really starts to ground you into the experience. It helps you to pay attention to what's present. And then that can start guiding you into what kinds of actions do I want to take? What's going on around me? How do I want to interact? What is my next step? And so again, it's a way to really start to get out of your head, get out of some of those thoughts. Again, our thoughts often drag us back to things that have already passed, those shots that we've missed, what happened earlier, what someone said, or they start to project into the future. What could go wrong? What am I doing later? Worrying about something that could happen. And so this is really about bringing it back to the present moment. So like we've done with the last couple strategies, I want you to just take a minute to think about how you might apply this. If it's just a reminder, ground myself, be present, if it's something like that, or if you're actually starting to shift your attention to different things in your environment. So again, no right or wrong, but just thinking about how you might actually apply this and jotting that down for yourself. Okay, so that gives us a few different cognitive strategies. Again, it's not like you have to use exclusively one. I think a lot of these can complement each other, but looking at reframing, replacing some of those less helpful thoughts, acknowledging that your thoughts can be there, and also starting to look at immersing yourself in terms of the present and interacting with what's going on in a different way. So those are our cognitive strategies. I want to go into some behavioral strategies. So again, recognizing that thoughts, feelings, emotions Behaviors are all intertwined. It is that cycle that we talked about at the start. Again, if we can look at how we're changing our behavior, that can have an influence on our thoughts too. And so some of these are going to be kind of happening in the moment of your golf game. Some of these are going to be maybe taken away before, after, daily life, those kinds of things. But again, these can start to make a difference in terms of how your brain is generally thinking, the thought patterns that you're starting to build up as habits. And then obviously that transfers into your golf game as well. We look at gratitude. I think this is a pretty common one. There's a lot about it in the media right now, social media. It's, I think, a fairly trendy or popular thing, but for a good reason. This is really just about pausing to consciously think about the good things, to notice the nice things, to just appreciate things in the moment. A lot of research is showing that gratitude actually improves your mood. It starts to improve your feelings of optimism, and it also decreases stress and decreases feelings of depression. And so again, it's a really good way to start consciously bringing positive thoughts into your life. And so you can do it in a couple different ways. You can stop and kind of appreciate things in the moment. So you're driving to work and you're like, oh, it's light out. I actually am really grateful for that. Or, you know what, it was a really pretty sunset today. Or someone dropped off a nice card for me and I really appreciate it. Maybe you're petting your animal and you're just feeling, you know what, they're really soft and I like cuddling with them. So you can be grateful for so many different things. It's just kind of making that conscious effort initially to stop and notice them. So you're noticing them in the moment. The other way that I think is also fairly common is keeping a gratitude kind of list and reflecting on it maybe at the end of the day. So kind of pausing and thinking back to your day and then being able to have that gratitude list. So that especially when you think back, it can cause you to relive them and maybe give a different swing on it than you actually lived it in the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause again. I want you to write down 3 things you're grateful for. So it can be 3 kind of big things, or it can be 3 things from today that you kind of maybe didn't feed into in the moment, but that you're feeling pretty grateful for. Maybe you actually stopped and appreciated them. But again, just writing down those 3 things for yourself. So like any of the thinking patterns that we're developing, starting to practice gratitude is a practice. It takes work. You're reforming a habit. You're working over kind of old patterns that you've developed and trying to implement something new. Sometimes it takes some reminders throughout the day, or a reminder from your phone, or a book by your bed at night. But the more you can start kind of being conscious that you want to pause and notice good things through your day, or maybe reflect at the end of the night, again, your brain starts to look for those things. And anytime we can start looking for more good things, then it just starts building. And then you start to notice more and more good things. And again, it starts to really shift with that. Perfect. I love the ones that were just shared. FaceTiming with your grandson, awesome. Watching the snow melt and disappear, absolutely. I'm very grateful for that as well. Going for a walk on a sunny day. Yeah, just being able to appreciate that and feeling that the sun is getting warmer. Yeah, the people you get to hang out with, that your family cares about each other, like spending time together, a good life. Yeah, and so the things that you think about, but just maybe not actually acknowledging it or expressing it. And so we can stop to really appreciate it. We can feel that, and we can notice how that actually, those thoughts start to shift our emotions, which can sometimes shift our behavior as well. Our next one here, thanks both of you for sharing those. I think those are great examples. Journaling. And again, it's pretty straightforward. It's nothing new or out of the ordinary, but when we journal, we take our thoughts from our head and we put them external. And I'm a big fan of pen and paper. I know people do things in different ways. If you want to type things out, if you want to do it on your phone, it's all about what's going to work best for you. But anytime we can stop and actually start to get thoughts out of our brain and externalize, again, I'll say on a piece of paper, but you start to think about them differently. You start to process them as you're trying to put those words into a sentence on a page or on your phone. So you can just kind of do free-form journaling where you're letting your thoughts come out as they come. Or sometimes you want to do a structured journaling. And I've given some examples here of how you could structure your journaling as a way to reflect and try to process in a different way, maybe try to pull some lessons out. And so what's good about this situation? What can I learn from this? How will this make me stronger or better? What kind of opportunities will come from this? What's funny about the situation? Maybe there's nothing funny right now, You might want to switch it and say, what's funny about this in 5 years, or what will be funny when I look back on it? Sometimes finding humor in it can shift how you're thinking about it. Again, coming back to the gratitude piece, what am I grateful for? Will this make a great story? And so again, recognizing that the things that we're going through can be heavy and serious, and there can be a lot of stress, but by stopping to journal about it, again, it helps us to start make sense. It helps us to start process. It helps us to start reframing, whether it's just that free flow form or specifically answering some questions. The last two strategies I've got are, I'd say, kind of very brain-body connection, where we want to actually use what we're doing with our body as a way to start changing our brain chemistry. And so this first one is power pose. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it. Essentially, our body language starts to shape how our brain reacts. And this is done through the release of hormones and neurotransmitters. And this was originally developed by Amy Cuddy. And there was the original published study and then some kind of counter studies that said it wasn't maybe as effective as originally stated. But then further research is showing that, yes, our body language does govern how we think and feel about ourselves, and how we actually physically hold our body can have a significant impact on our mind. And so if we can start doing some of these things, using some of this body language, again, it sends some of those subtle cues to our brain that can help us to feel more confident, more positive, more connected. And so essentially with power pose, you're going to hold essentially a superhero pose. So like the two people on the slide are doing, you want to stand up tall, put your shoulders back, head up, gaze forward. You can put your hands on your hips, feet shoulder width apart. You want to kind of bring your chest up and just feel like, yeah, I'm big, I'm strong, I'm holding this kind of powerful position. Some people like to do it looking in a mirror and kind of feed off the energy. If you can hold this pose for a couple of minutes, awesome. Recognizing that if you're in the middle of the golf course, just standing there for 2 minutes like this, people might start to look at you funny, but we can do this for 10, 15 seconds at a time. And it just is actually fairly typical posture. A lot of times people are doing it or you're doing it and you don't really pick up on it because it can be pretty normal. Obviously, if you're standing there without moving, that's maybe when it feels like it's a bit more awkward, but this is something that you could do before a game, between shots, again, just as a way to start kind of feeding into how you're holding your body, feeling like you're more confident, and then sending some of those signals to your brain. If you haven't tried it out, I really encourage you to. I think it's a lot of fun. You can do it before a work presentation or before an exam or some of those pressure situations, and it's just kind of a fun way. For those of you that are, let's see, Ted Lasso fans, you might recognize Rebecca doing her own version of power pose. So you can kind of, you notice like the big expansive power, like the stance. So she came up with her own way that she liked to do it. Play around with it. I'd say the superhero pose is more common than this one, but do what works for you in terms of starting to feed into this. Our last behavioral strategy is actually smiling. And again, this is one where there's a lot of research that's coming out on smiling and how smiling can also change our brain chemistry and change the thoughts that we're having. And so if we can use smiling in a really deliberate way, what it does is it sends messages to our brain that we're feeling pretty good, that we're feeling relaxed, and it can actually be a way to help us manage our energy levels. It can be ways to manage things like fatigue or pain, but smiling actually triggers our brain to experience increased levels of happiness and joy. And so it's something that you can do pretty easily. Maybe you're planning on smiling like before every shot. Maybe that's just something that you're wanting to do. Maybe you're chatting with someone that you're golfing with and you're smiling and it's a bit more natural. But again, by focusing on something and smiling, by kind of scanning around and noticing where you're at and smiling, thinking of something specific, the smile can make a big difference in terms of how you're starting to feel about things and how your brain is perceiving messages, and then some of the thoughts that you're having. So those are the 4 different strategies. I went through the behavioral ones a bit more quickly than the cognitive ones. I think in general, they're more straightforward. That being said, I do want to let Anna speak now about her strategies, how she's applied her own kind of thinking patterns and worked through whether it's some of these or some other ideas, but just to get her sense of what this looks like on and off the course.
Hello, everyone. Let me just make you all wait a minute while I do my quick power pose. Is anyone feeling confident yet? So well, first of all, thank you, Lisa, for everything you've said. I love everything, as always. And everything that she's talked about, I want everyone to know that these are such amazing tips. Before I am presenting, before each week, I've gone over, Lisa's slides, because I'm really here to add on to what she has to say. And really everything that she's pointing out are things that I've used to play on professional tours, which is just amazing. All of this new research that is coming out on mentality and positivity, use that. Being here today and a part of this talk is already such a huge step into making your golf game better, but also just making your life better. So back to the power pose. I actually do that, except walking down the fairway if I'm pushing my golf cart. I really do feel better when I'm walking, like this, looking up at the trees. And, I'm grateful that I get to be outside every day and I get to play golf. Oh, wow, that tree is such a pretty color. These are actual things that went through my brain during tournament rounds. And the reason why I say that is because, first of all, posture is important, does make a difference. Second, I would honestly even use the gratitude talk or gratitude questions in my round as a distraction, because it's not as a distraction. I'm still gaining the benefits of acknowledging and being grateful for getting to be outside. Oh, the weather's so nice today. So glad it didn't rain. Even if it did rain, at least it's not pouring. But it's also a great way to take up time between shots, because that is also a place where all of these emotional thoughts can just go on a rampage. And honestly, that can be kind of scary sometimes. So moving on to those rampaging thoughts, acknowledging the negative thoughts was a big one for me. When I realized that pushing the thoughts down made it worse, and trying to hold them down without acknowledging that they were there made it a very stressful round. I've played many rounds where I've been extremely stressed because I'm just trying to control my mind, which you can't control your mind. Your mind can't control you. So why try? You can influence your mind and your thoughts can influence what you do, but it doesn't control what you do or what you think. So when you try and hold these thoughts down, be like, okay, I just hit it to 6 feet. That's a birdie. Okay, I haven't birdied yet today. All right, this is the first birdie. That can be a stressful time walking up to the green. You've got at least 5 minutes. And then you've got another 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 waiting for the other people around you to putt. And it's not necessarily about pushing them down. It's really about being like, okay, yeah, I want to make the putt. I want to make the putt, not I have to make the putt or I need to make the putt. Those are big word differences, especially in stressful situations. And you can acknowledge that it's okay if you miss it. It's a golf game. You might lose $5 if you're playing against your buddy, but what are you going to do? Worst case scenario, you lose $5. Best case scenario, you're calm, you enjoy the entire process of the golf game, and you make the putt. And even if you miss it, it's also okay. Yeah, I love everything that Lisa said today. So everything I'm really just adding on and giving some funny examples, because everything she's talked about is a ton of things that I've done in the past. So in regards to, Lisa uses the word reframing. I like to use rewriting my story. So she's reframing the story. I kind of rewrite it in my head. And you can only do that if you acknowledge what you are thinking, or if you had a bad thought. You can't change the thought if you don't know what's happening, right? So after you acknowledge it, you have the awareness to change it, and you get to say, I get to do this instead of I have to do this. Because when you say, oh, I have to practice today, it's just not a motivating sentence. But say, okay, I get to practice today. I get to have a chance at being better. I want to be better at my putting, so I'm going to do this. Instead of saying I need to be better at putting because, you know, I don't want to miss the last putt that 6 foot putt again. It's like you're now creating this fear around all of the shots that you're about to hit in all of your future rounds. And making one positive little change in your wording can make an outrageous difference. I've got a chat here. Let's see. Yes. So Sue is asked, in competition, you must have had the experience of playing partners who tried to get in your head through comments or actions to throw off your game. What is a good strategy? Love the question. And I'm going to bring it back to sometimes people will do that, and sometimes you're overthinking it. So it's honestly best to be oblivious and kind of do your own thing, but acknowledge that they said it, acknowledge how it makes you feel, and then think realistically, how do I want to react to something like this? You know, it's not always about focusing on the other person, even though that's a big part of golf that, you know, not everybody talks about it. You know, you're really trying to play your own game, but there are so many other factors. There's the weather, there's the people you play with, you know, whether they're friends with you, whether they're not, like whether they're trying to get in your head, whether they're just extremely oblivious and have no idea that they like walked right through your line. You know, there's lots of little things in golf that can get in your head, and sometimes we get in our own heads. So my best advice for that is to really just focus on yourself and your next shot. Now, another way to do that would be to, you know, distract yourself and look at the trees, be like, yeah, that tree has a lot of flowers today. I don't think it had a lot of flowers last week. That's pretty cool. You know, as silly as it sounds, those were things that would go through my head. And there's lots of people that would do that. And sometimes people are just having a bad day. So it's easier and a lot less effort to have to worry about them when you can just worry about what you're doing. All right. So go through these questions real quick and then I'll move on. Okay, missing was okay, don't worry. Yes, great quote by Fred Couples. Love that one. All right. Anna, how did you deal with the thoughts when playing with really slow players or rotten weather? If you have played with a really slow player. Oh, trust me, I have played with some slow players. Oh, you know what? I actually love talking about it because I'm an extremely fast player. When I got to university, my golf coach was timing everybody's pre-shot routines so that, you know, we all knew that we weren't going to get any penalty strokes for, oh, you're welcome, Sue, and any penalty strokes for being slow. My routine was 7 seconds and you get 40. I used, you know, in my head, I always planned to have 30 because I never wanted to be even relatively close to taking that much time, because the 40 seconds actually counts for, you know, when it's your turn, not when your pre-shot routine starts. But when you play with really slow players, it is difficult because you really have to almost change your rhythm to match what they're doing. But, you know, you don't want to react too much to change what you're doing. So there's a couple ways to do it. So distracting yourself and looking at the trees or looking at the sky or whatever, distracting yourself and finding other ways to fill the time when they are hitting is a great way to do it. And I've done kind of all of these. I've tried a lot of different things, and it's really cool because golf, just like life, changes all the time. So like some things might work better today and some things might work better tomorrow. And then another whole different thing that you might not even know of might work better like 2 years from now. So you can distract yourself. You can honestly even doodle on your scorecard. One of the girls I played with on tour, when we had a lot of slow rounds on tour, she literally brought a coloring book and would color in the lines on her cart, like on her push cart when we were waiting for people ahead of us. It was honestly awesome. I loved it. So distracting yourself in any way, whatever works for you, that's a great idea. I wouldn't necessarily try this. I do think this is a little bit more advanced, unless this is something you're a little bit more open to. But I actually had to slow down my rhythm and I slowed down my pre-shot routine so that it wasn't 7 seconds, because when I was so quick, it drove me insane having to wait 40 seconds for somebody to hit their shot when I know that I could hit mine in 7. So I went from 7 seconds to probably 15 seconds. Now, even though it is doubled, it is quite a lot longer than what I had before. I didn't change anything. I just kind of slowed every step by like half a second in my pre-shot routine. You can also walk slower. I think those are really the main ones, but distracting yourself is the easiest one. And you can always talk to other players, like if they're not about to hit, if they're taking their time around the greens. Because it's different if they're just doing their pre-shot routine that's slow, or if their preparation is also slow. So acknowledging which one is slow can really change which way you decide to handle playing with a slow player. Austin, yes, I like to remind myself I'm playing against the course and not other golfers. Love that. As soon as you start comparing yourself with other people, it gets really tricky. And I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because that was a big one. And it kind of leads me into my next point. One of my negative thoughts was, oh man, they're on LPGA, like they're really good. But here I am playing in a mini tour event in the same group as this amazing LPGA tour player. So I was a little bit nervous. But you really just have to do your own thing. And it sounds really silly, but no one cares what you do. Like as straight up as that is, no one cares, which is kind of really freeing, because you don't have to care what anybody else does. They don't have to care about what you do. You're just out there to have a good round, right? And there's lots of different ways to think about it too. So, if that's too blunt for you and it's not the phrase you want to use, that's totally cool. That's not for everybody. But moving on to the example. So when they were on LPGA, I played with this amazing player and I was a little bit nervous, and she was really, really good and one of the top players at the time. It was before the season started, so that's why they were playing a mini tour to kind of prepare for the next, couple events. But we were in the same group, and I had to remind myself that I'm here, I'm playing the same course as anybody playing today, and I'm just going to do my best. I'm going to focus on my shots. I'm going to do my routine, and I'm going to acknowledge what they're doing and maybe see if there's something that I can do that they're doing, but change it and make it for me. So all in all, like that whole day was really cool, because I actually was able to focus on myself, and I played really well, and I beat the awesome LPGA Tour player, and I was so pumped. And it kind of proved to myself that it doesn't matter if they're on a better tour than me, if they have a better stroke average than me, if they are a better putter than me. It does not matter, because today is the one day and I'm going to do my best. Now, when I really figured that out was when I would compare my practice to other people. I realized that when I practiced for 10 hours a day, I played terrible, but everybody else was doing it on tour. So that's what I decided that I wanted to do. But I realized very quickly that that did not work for me. I was better with practicing for 4 hours and then playing a game and then going to play an actual round of golf. Because if I focused on too much practice, I would get very robotic and I would get in my head. Now, for the players that do practice that much, that's awesome. That works for them. But it was more about finding what worked for me. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever received was, there are a million ways to make it to the LPGA. And there really are. There's a million ways to do anything. So if you can do what you want to do, acknowledging what other people are doing and how they got better, and then tweaking what they did to really fit your lifestyle and your golf game, or whatever you're trying to do, that's really it. And this brings us all back to our very first talk with Lisa about self-awareness. Yes, Jason, find your way. So that's a really big one, being able to have the awareness, which is why you ask yourselves all these questions. You reframe your body, you get good posture. These are all great ways to figure out what works best for you. And then Lisa did mention as well that golf is an emotional sport. Life is very emotional. Now, I love golf. One of the reasons is because it is so similar to life. It's like a mini roller coaster of life in an 18-hole round. Being able to acknowledge things that are happening and then being able to rewrite or reframe them in your brain is going to be a huge advantage. So really just the main things that are important is acknowledging your negative thoughts. If you don't acknowledge them, you can't do anything about them. And then changing the way you go about it. Okay. But pushing them down, that hurts you. That only hurts you. So there's no reason to hold it all in, even though it feels better to just never acknowledge that you've ever said, I suck at putting. Don't ever say that. That comes in your brain. No, that's okay. Do I suck at putting? No, I'm probably okay. Not as good as I want to be, but that doesn't mean I can't get better. If you say I suck, that doesn't leave room for improvement. All right. And then my last point here, which is something that Lisa brought up, journaling. Oh my gosh, is it amazing, you guys? Not everybody does it. And I will say it took me a while to get into it too. But I really, the big part that helped me get into journaling was being able to write my thoughts as is. So it is really nice having, questions written out, and those were a great way for me to start. But now that I've journaled quite a bit more, I do find that I feel better when I write whatever comes to my brain. And I honestly write whatever comes to my brain. If it's petty, if it's rude, if it's annoyed, if it's whatever, if it's happy, it's ecstatic, it's exaggerated, it does not matter. If it's in my brain, it's now going to be on paper. If you can get over your ego to write whatever is actually in your brain, you will uncover some crazy things that goes on in your head. And it's so cool, like you wouldn't be able to do that if you, were telling this to a friend. Like a lot of people will use their friends, and they'll vent to a friend about things. Whereas like you're probably going to rephrase things when you talk to your friend. Whereas if you're journaling to yourself and it's only to you, you really get to find out how you feel about something because you're putting it on paper or you're typing it out. But if you're telling someone else about it, you're more likely to change how you think about it rather than acknowledging what you actually feel. So being able to journal and just get it all out in one way without any rephrasing is amazing. So key points here to take away from that, because I know I love to talk about all of these things. It's just so fun. Posture matters. Simple way to uplift your spirit. Roll your shoulders back, smile, head up. That really makes a difference. Acknowledging your fears instead of pushing them down. So that way you can actually let them go. And then rewrite your story in your brain or in your journal. However you want to do it, it's your story. You get to write it. And that's all I got to say. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. Always helpful to hear about how it's applied on the course and what works for you. And I think there's some really great tips that came out of that. Just to wrap things up quickly, we talk about being optimistic, pessimistic. Maybe there's another option. And so again, just really encouraging you to take this opportunity to be aware of your self-talk, be aware of those thinking patterns, think about what is going to be helpful, think about those opportunities that you can be using day to day and on the golf course as a way to feel like you're able to take your steps forward and to guide your behavior and guide your thoughts in a way that's going to work for you. To wrap things up quickly, again, we've talked about this. Build awareness of your thoughts. Find out what those thoughts typically are. Find out what thoughts you have in different situations. Find out what works for you. Find out what doesn't work for you. Really starting to remember that this is a habit that you're changing. This is something that you're trying to rebuild. This is a skill. It's going to take some time. Give yourself that space to work on it without getting too down and discouraged, and recognize the progress that you're making. Obviously, we talked about a lot of different cognitive and behavioral strategies to address your thinking patterns. Having a number of different strategies can make a difference because you're able to apply them on their own, you're able to apply them together, you're able to apply them in different situations based on what's going to be most helpful for you in that moment. And really, like we talked about at the start, your thoughts influence your emotions, which influence your behavior. Really want to make those work for you. So to be purposeful with it is going to be a key thing. As always, I'm happy to answer questions. You're more than welcome to reach out to me. Anna, I think, will put her email address in the chat. I know we went over a bit tonight. Thanks for hanging out with us. We will wrap up. If you want to hang on and ask questions for us, you're more than welcome to. But otherwise, thanks again for joining and have a great evening, everyone.